All right. I think it's exactly 4 o'clock and we can start. Um, Hello to all the friends of TCLP and including our own wonderful librarians, members, student leaders who have joined, and all library workers and library activists and people who are just generally curious about free libraries. Welcome to a very, very special International Literacy Day event, where we are talking about something that is very close to our hearts at the Community Library Project. Just a shout out to our curriculum director, Michael Creighton, who was originally going to participate with us on this chat, but he couldn't. But we have the wonderful Prachi Grover with us, and Prachi has been TCLP's, a sort of curriculum genius mind. And she is also one of the driving forces behind our Reading Fluency program. And the Reading Fluency program is like I said, it's a really unique sort of program that we believe all free libraries, especially if you are working predominantly with first generation readers, should definitely consider having. And so welcome, Prachi. Thank you so much for joining.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, just give us like a little bit of a brief of like how, because today in the morning when we had put up the event on Facebook, actually we got a question in our DMs saying, how does one become a curriculum coordinator with a library? So just, I thought like I'll just ask you that and then we can get into reading fluency. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have been in the education sector for the last about 7 years when I first started my academic journey in education. So I have done an MA in education. I have a few years of work experience in education, working in government departments. I worked with Andhra Pradesh government in the higher education department. Then I worked as a research associate studying school level management and district level management in the school system. And then I also did my MPhil in education, where my area of focus was in children's literature and how children respond to literature. Um, I think the idea that a curriculum coordinator can exist in a library was very new to me as well. I hadn't thought that libraries existed in this manner, but I joined TCLP in 2018 as a volunteer, and well, I was meant to stay there, I guess. So yeah, um, I worked there. I learned a lot about the library, and I think in any kind of library, I think there's so much scope for curriculum to exist, because the whole idea behind the library is to encourage reading, is to encourage thinking while reading, and all that needs a lot of thought, a lot of preparation, a lot of guidance and handholding with the members. And for that, we need a structured curriculum. We need to think out what kind of pedagogy we are going to use in the library and what kind of reading programs we are going to implement in the library, what our members really need. And for that, we need regular interaction with the members, regular interaction with what's happening out there in the in education research, what reading programs are being implemented all over the world, and how members are responding to those reading programs. So I think curriculum is an essential part of any library-based program.
Right. And now coming specifically to the reading fluency project that we have undertaken at TCLP, I'll just backtrack a little bit, because when we were in the early years of our library work with at TCLP, and also actually later on, we kept getting the question of, but what about literacy? Why don't you focus on literacy? Now, TCLP has focused very deeply on fluency. So can you help us understand the difference between these two concepts and why, like, as a library, we chose to go the fluency route?
So, if we all try to recall how we learned to read, back in school, in nursery class or a preparatory school or class 1, we were taught the alphabet, ta tha ga in Hindi or ABC in English, and we learned that okay, अगर हम इन अक्षरों को जोड़ते हैं, we form a word, and then we join all these words and we form a sentence. So this idea that each letter or each sound can be represented as a symbol on a piece of paper, and that these letters can be combined to form words, and these words can combine to form sentences, and that you can make meaning out of these symbols written on the word on the paper. That concept is called decoding. So essentially understanding this relationship between sounds and letters and the symbols that we use to represent them. That's called decoding. That's what we usually begin our literacy education with at schools. Um, but that's not sufficient, and that's not the only thing that we should essentially begin with, because just being able to call out the words on paper does not help me understand what's happening in the text itself. So um, so what happens a lot of the times is, and we see that happening all around us, we all have memories of us reading in classroom and the teacher calls us, and being very nervous of not being able to read with a flow, with making mistakes, and we all do that, we all did that, we all still do that. So when we read and we are not able to read with a flow or with ease, or we will make a lot of mistakes while reading, that is because we are not able to read with fluency. So essentially, to be able to read with fluency is not just to call out the words that are written on a piece of paper, but to be able to read them with ease, to be able to read them with accuracy, that is making as few errors as possible, reading it at an appropriate pace. So neither reading too fast nor reading too slow, and reading with expression, with tones, with proper phrasing. All that is an essential part of reading, and all that is an essential part of reading with understanding. So decoding is essentially just understanding the relationship between sound and letters, uh, and the symbols that represent them, and fluency is reading them with ease, and with when reading becomes a lot more automatic for you.
So coming specifically to TCLP, जब हम TCLP की बात करते हैं तो जैसे अभी हमने पहले डिस्कस किया था कि TCLP ने डिसाइड किया कि हम रीडिंग फ्लुएंसी पे स्पेसिफिक प्रोग्राम करेंगे. तो थोड़ा सा उसके बारे में बताइए कि TCLP में ऐसी नीड क्यों आई कि हमें लगा कि रीडिंग फ्लुएंसी हैज टू बी a focus area. Just talk us through a little bit about like when this need came up, and how did it start, how did the program start?
So I'll first tell a little more about why reading fluency is important, because
Yes.
I think that's important to understand why we need it at a library. So essentially what happens when one is not reading fluently, is that you are reading either too slow, or you're making too many errors, and your mental energy is basically being spent on understanding, on decoding, on understanding what's written on the piece of paper. So when your mental capacity is just focused on identifying the letters and combining them to form words, you don't have enough working memory left to think about what's written, or to make meaning of what is written. And unless you are actually making meaning of what is written, that's not meaningful reading that's happening. In fact, our understanding of literacy has has moved way beyond just reading the words, but it's our understanding of literacy has developed far beyond to understand that it includes reading with thinking, it includes comprehending what's written, it includes adding your own thoughts to it. So in a space like the Community Library Project, or any library where we are working towards encouraging thinking and reading with thinking, and talking about access to books and reading, um, like we are all here because we believe that reading is a powerful activity, and it's important that access to reading is important, and that's why we talk about free libraries, we talk about open shelves, we talk about ease of admission, and in a very similar way we talk about reading fluency. So reading fluency is essential to provide access to books and to reading with thinking. So what happens when you're not reading with fluency is that your comprehension is affected, because you're not able to spend enough mental capacity on understanding, on thinking what is written. And if you're not able to understand, or if you're not able to think about what you're reading, then your access to books is actually very limited. Because then, like, just imagine somebody coming into the library, picking up a book, and struggling to read what's written on the cover page. The child will be disheartened. They will feel discouraged. They will feel frustrated, and they will probably just put the book back on shelf and think that, oh, I'm not a reader. But the truth is that we all can become readers. We all we all think, so we all can read as well. What it needs is a little bit more of an intervention. So just as we implement programs like circulation and open shelves to invite members to the library and to engage with books, Reading Fluency is a step further to help them engage with books in a more meaningful way, to become independent, thoughtful, and confident readers.
One thing that struck me, like with in my experience with working at the library, was कि बहुत बार ऐसे होता है कि बच्चे actually ऐसा आपको ऐसे लगता है कि वो fluently वो पेज पढ़ रहे हैं, because their reading speed, they're pretty efficient in how well they get to the from the beginning of the page to the end of the page. लेकिन उसके बाद जब आप बातचीत करने लगते हैं, तो then you know that the thought process behind that reading has not evolved that much.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm from what you've told me, reading fluency is really getting at that also. So I was curious, before we go into what the program is, how do you really gauge where a reader is at in terms of their fluency, so that you can say, okay, fine, we can deliver a program to this child? How do you gauge that?
So there are methods of assessing a reading fluency. Uh, so at a first glance, an informal observation helps, and that's how our first program, like the first pilot program back in 2016, started, when we informally observed that a lot of the students who are coming into the library, they are participating in read alouds, they're participating in discussions, but when they're reading, so either they're reading very slow, or they're not reading books that are appropriate for their age level. So we realized that there is a need for an intervention like a reading fluency intervention. So we started the screening process, and that screening process is an assessment essentially. So there are so a lot of research done in some Western countries have come up with certain benchmarks. So based on the research done, they have identified what could be an appropriate, or what should be an appropriate speed of reading at a certain age level. Unfortunately, we do not have similar research done in India. We have had a few researchers in very recent years, but we are still working towards a better understanding of how readers in India read, what's the appropriate reading speed for readers reading in Hindi, when Hindi is their first language, or reading in another language, in another Indian language that's native to them. But basically what we do is we read with students, and we also measure how much time they're taking to read a certain text, how many errors they're making, and what kind of errors they're making, because they are very informative. The kind of errors that students are making, they tell us a lot about what kind of reading problems a child might be facing, because sometimes certain things that come so naturally to us, like something like reading the letter k, seems so natural, um, but it may not be so natural to students. I can remember doing certain assessments last year when we did a full-fledged year-long program, and I found like 5 students in a row reading the letter k as k, and that was the first time I noticed that how similar they look. The symbols look so similar, k and k. And so something which is so automatic to us, we look at the letter A and we know it's A. We look at B and we know it's B. But when you don't have enough reading practice, when you don't have enough exposure to books and reading material, meaningful reading material, then these letters don't come so naturally to you. So while assessing, if we are able to gauge how long it takes, like if you are able to gauge the reading speed of the child, if you're able to gauge the with how much accuracy the child is reading, then we have certain benchmarks to help identify what kind of interventions the child needs, and also to track progress as they move along the intervention.
Okay, so coming to now the program itself, I mean, I want to get into the nitty gritties. कितना लंबा प्रोग्राम होता है, उसमें कितने बच्चे आते हैं, how many teachers or specialists do you need, etc. But I want to just take like a short uh, detour, not a detour, it's connected, is to say that actually libraries are the perfect place to work on reading fluency, क्योंकि लाइब्रेरी से अच्छी कोई जगह, फ्री लाइब्रेरी से अच्छी कोई जगह हो ही नहीं सकती है जिसमें लोग अपनी रीडिंग प्रैक्टिस कर सकते हैं बिना किसी हिचकिचाहट के. मतलब कोई आपको नहीं बोल, you don't have to spend any money, कोई रोक टोक नहीं है on the number of books you can read at one particular time. So actually libraries and reading fluency are a perfect match, the way that maybe literacy and schools are perhaps better suited as a match. So I just wanted to like kind of like make that point as well. And now coming now to जो program हमने develop किया था pilot program से, थोड़ा सा उसके बारे में like tell us what that comprises of.
So I'll just quickly add to your previous point also, because an intervention like the reading fluency intervention, which I'll just shortly describe, the best part of it is you're right that we need a library to go along with an intervention like this, because it's based on it's based on the idea that reading material will be easily accessible to students. But programs like these are very easily implementable in schools too, and should be. We can talk more about this later, but I'll first now come to the program that we implemented at TCLP. So when we did the pilot program in 2016, it was a short program. We did a 3-week long program during the summer vacation. We did a similar program in 2017 and 2018. So for 3 years, we kind of tested these interventions. So these reading programs or these reading interventions that we implemented as part of the Reading Fluency program, they were not invented by us. They are not magic tricks. They have been working well for years and years in many countries, and many schools have adopted it in the West too. So we adopted a lot of these practices that were best suited to our members, and did 3-week programs for 3 consecutive years during the summer vacations, and we saw some wonderful results. So we realized that A, that interventions like these do work, and B, just a summer program is not sufficient because you're only able to reach out to so many students. But there are so many more students waiting for a program like this. So in 2019, for the academic year 1920, we started a full year program where we did 5 batches of reading fluency, each batch running for 6 weeks of intensive classroom practice, and 2 weeks of enrollment, screening, graduation, assessment, and etc. So so we ran these programs at both our library locations, 2 of our library locations, one in Sikandarpur and the other in Delhi. And we had reading specialists working on this. So we do need a full-time dedicated person working on this, because interventions like these rely a lot on the student-teacher interaction that's happening. So a lot of the learning is happening through peers, a lot of the learning is happening with the teacher. So the way that this program was structured was that each group of students, so basically in a day we would have many classes, and each group would comprise of not more than 10 students. There will be one teacher. Usually we also had another adult, either a volunteer or an intern, or one of the curriculum coordinators would be there to help around, because that would ensure more one-on-one interaction with the students. So yeah, so these classes ran for 6 weeks, 5 days a week. We met for 1 hour every day. Certain students who needed some additional help because they were struggling with some basic decoding, then we also provided half an hour extra class every day to those students. So essentially, while we did start off with a reading fluency program, we did add elements of literacy learning, elements of learning how to read. So yeah, so eventually it did turn into more than just fluency, because when you are learning to read, you can't just focus on one element. So decoding, fluency, comprehension, all of these things have to go hand in hand. So when we are saying that we were running fluency classes, we don't mean that we were not working on comprehension. You know, we were not. It doesn't mean you were not working on thinking, but that our primary focus was on fluency. So essentially, it was designed to ensure that students get a lot of reading practice every day. And that's what we need to run a good reading fluency program is access to books, reading practice every day, guidance from the teacher. And that's the reason that it's so easily implementable in a space like a library, where students are coming in and browsing, the many shelves and many books, and they have that free space to read and to think books of their own choice.
So what would a typical, like अगर मैं आपके पठन प्रवाह बैच में हूँ तो what would I experience when I join, like what do the sessions look like?
So a typical session will include many different reading components. So we begin with, the one of the most important components which we follow TCLP wide is to welcome students and treat them with pyar se. So that's like the most important component, because we want to create a classroom where students can be free from fear. They are not scared of the teachers or their peers, or they are not scared of making mistakes, because that's an important part of learning to read, is to make mistakes and correct yourself. So that's the first component. But we also had other important components. So essentially, we had a lot of reading, small reading interventions. So for example, uh, pairing up with a partner and reading with a partner. So that's very helpful, because then you're learning from your peer, you're helping each other, and you're reading with someone you trust, because probably they're your friend. We also had components where the teacher would sit with the student and read with them,
One on one.
uh, one-on-one. That's also important, because a lot of the time students need that kind of guidance. Like, while we say that if students practice reading every day, they will become fluent readers. Yes, that's true. But they also need some additional guidance from the teacher, some more one-on-one time, because that one-on-one time is not just about reading, but it's also a lot about communication and talking about the book. Because when you are learning how to read fluently, you're also what helps is how you're understanding the book, because then you're taking hints from what you are reading to read better. So the teacher's role is very important here, where she communicates with the child, where she talks with the student about the book. So what's essentially she's doing is she's helping the child to think more about the book, and also modeling how to talk about a book. So teacher interaction is a very important component of any fluency classroom. And also that's a good way for the teacher to observe how the student is progressing, where the student is struggling, what kind of help the student needs. So we do some sort of partner reading, we do some guided reading from teacher. Most importantly, we do a lot of independent reading time, where the students are free to just walk up. They're generally free in the library to walk up to any bookshelf and pick up a book. But this dedicated independent reading time is when they can read as many books as they want. They can select and reject any book. They can pick up one book, read 2 pages, and decide this is not for me, and I'm going to read some other book. So something very wonderful starts happening in these independent reading times, because students browse these bookshelves. They start recommending books to each other. They start identifying which is my favorite book. Uh, there was a student in one of our classes who had been struggling a lot with reading. So he started practicing from the same book every day. So he would come to the class. It was his favorite book. He would pick that book up every day and read it. And a few weeks into the program, he came up to me and said, "अब मैं पढ़ सकता हूँ, आप मुझसे ये वाली किताब सुनो." And he was so excited. And so that's the idea behind incorporating these various components, because it gives because the idea is that the student should not just read fluency, but also identify themselves as readers.
Yeah.
So when we incorporate these different components, it gives them, so like for example, something like a partner reading will give them time to settle into the class.
Yeah.
Something like independent reading is giving them time to explore themselves as readers and explore different kinds of literature that's available. So yeah, so these are some of the important components: welcoming students, interacting with students, different kinds of reading programs, um, s- giving some reading material for students to take back home and practice reading at home at their own pace, and whenever they want to read and practice. So
I mean, and I think one of the most profound things I have noticed, क्योंकि मैं तो वॉलंटियर हूँ जो हफ्ते में शायद एक बार लाइब्रेरी में आती हूँ और बच्चों से इंटरेक्ट करती हूँ, तो I see every week I'll see like weekly games, you know, and I think one of the most profound things I have observed is that there is this one child in particular who I'm thinking of, but there are many I'm sure like him, who are really they also come with certain behavioral challenges, and it's actually perhaps sometimes a sign of how intellectual they are at one level, that you know they start to like act out because they are actually in certain ways ahead, but they have not got that opportunity to channelize their intellect. And I he would do this thing where in a read aloud he would take the book, and if you were not reading the text with him, you would think he's actually reading very fluently from the book, but actually he was decoding the pictorial story. सारे चित्रों को देख के वो कहानी बहुत ही accurately सुना रहा था, और उसका basic reading ability था, but it was not enough to make meaning from the text. और बहुत और मैंने देखा मतलब 3 4 5 हफ्तों में reading, of course, you know, it's always exciting when you see somebody's reading really become amazing and efficient and all of that, but the change in the person himself, you know, he came into his own, and as a reader he truly identified with being a reader, and the confidence that comes, the power that comes from reading fluency. So I hope कि जो भी सुन रहे हैं, they don't only see reading fluency as this, you know, अच्छा ठीक है अब हमको अपना correct words per minute improve करना है, but there is a profound change in children once they recognize that they can be powerful readers. So I think sorry, I'll be
and no, I think you're very right. We have several such examples from so last year we graduated 300 students. Like that's a lot of students. And out of these 300 students, like we have a lot of such stories where and a big credit goes to our reading fluency teacher. So I remember our fluency teacher Bhavna ma'am who actually worked so hard in like to reach out to students and build relationships with them, because any kind of intervention, whether it's a library program as a whole or it's an reading and fluency program, unless you build relationship with students and show trust in them and give them the confidence to come into your classroom and read what they want to read and how they want to read, they won't come in. So I remember one student who enrolled for the program and then didn't turn up for the class. And so the reading fluency teacher, she would call his parent every day and go out and ask him to join the class. And eventually he not just started coming to the class, but he, after the program ended, he requested to enroll again for the next batch. So um, so what you're essentially doing is helping students build a relationship with books as well. So it's not just that you are reading fluently now, but as you say that a lot more, like a more profound change is also seen in a lot of students when they start um, seeing so many different ideas, when they start building relationship with the books and with the library, and when they start seeing themselves as readers and they gain the confidence to read the book of their choice. So yeah, so again, reading fluency is not a magic trick happening, but it's definitely a very impactful intervention that's so easy to implement too. So that's the best part. Like it needs a lot of hard work. It needs a lot of preparation. It needs a lot of constant, constant thinking about what you're doing, constant reflection. But it's doable. It's doable in any classroom, in any library.
So in fact, I mean, you've given me the perfect like segue into what I wanted to ask you. This is for the sake of other librarians who might be watching us now or will watch this chat sometime in the future. Is that like how what are the essential building blocks? How can one go about instituting this for their libraries, especially if they're a free library?
I'll categorize this into four broad building blocks under which there are several smaller components. So first one is obviously reading material. So books, lots and lots of books. And by books, we don't just mean picture books. We mean books of all kinds.
Mm.
We need picture books. We need books in different languages. We need books in the language that children speak. We need books from different genres. We need novels. We need nonfiction, and we need magazines. And it's remarkable what kind of change we can observe when we have a diversity of books to choose from.
Right.
In this, we need a class structure. So we need a teacher who understands the program, who understands the children, who can work with the children well. That's so important. And we need certain time set aside for reading every day, because a program like this is built on the idea that students need to practice reading every day. So we need a certain structure around it. We then there are certain cultural elements, because we need to build a culture of reading and a culture of fearless learning and reading. So essentially, where students have the freedom to touch, to hold, to flip through books, to select books and to reject books, to browse books, and they need um, they need to know that it's okay to make mistakes, and they need to know that it's okay for me to come in and sit here and read books for hours if I want to. So we need that kind of a culture. Um, and we need some pedagogical and curriculum elements, obviously. So basically, thinking what kind of reading interventions we need, what kind of like how long the class should go on, what kind of guidance the student needs. So for example, last year when we in our very first batch of the very first 6 week batch that we started last year, we observed certain students who were really struggling to read. They were studying in elementary and secondary school, and they were struggling to read text from grade 2 and grade 3. So we identified that the problem is not just fluency but decoding. So basically they were struggling to identify letters, and that's where we needed a change in our curricular practices too, because we realized that just a fluency intervention won't help here. So we needed a more direct instruction from the teacher, and that's when we developed a learn to read program. As we developed the Learn to Read program, we actually developed reading material, like these small booklets, uh, which like basically 3 different series of booklets to help students who were struggling to read practice their decoding, practice reading, practice fluency every day, apart from the regular fluency classes. So essentially, while these are some big components, reading material, class structure, cultural elements, and the pedagogical and curriculum elements. Uh, Apart from them, you also need a constant, you know, uh, like the teacher needs to be constantly observing what's happening in the classroom, what's happening with the students, and we need to constantly reflect and innovate. Because if we go in with a very rigid set of ideas or a very very rigid set of pedagogical practices, believing that each student will respond to it in a similar way, that's not going to happen, because each student will learn at their own pace. They will gain fluency at their own pace. So each student will also need a different kind of guidance and different kind of intervention. So that kind of creativity and flexibility in a program is also very important.
So speaking of which, you also spoke about this learn to read approach with the booklet. Now, a couple of years back, perhaps around the same time we were starting our reading fluency program, there was a state government push for reading programs in schools, where the booklet was the center of the program. What is your thought process on just having a booklet based fluency program? How does that work? Does it work?
um, I'll give you an example. Imagine you're trying to learn how to play the guitar, and someone hands you a guitar. It's like, okay, you have the guitar now. Here's a tutorial. See it and learn how to play guitar. It won't work, because you need some guidance. You need to be taught what even a guitar is. How does it produce sound? What am I supposed to do with the strings? And you need that guitar to be available to you every day to practice. So while while that booklet is an essential reading material that is being provided to students, that's not sufficient, because that's again kind of binding students to a certain kind of reading material. So unless there is more reading material present in the classroom that students can access anytime, if I'm bored of reading this one story, do I have a book like Pippi Longstocking available to read? If I don't, then I'm definitely missing out on something, because maybe I, as a student, I'm ready to read that kind of a reading material. Secondly, a book is great, but if there is no teacher to guide you through the process of how to engage with that book, what to do with that booklet, to help you when when you get stuck, or help you how to even identify. So, like, there's a whole process to, if you're making mistakes, you don't always need a teacher to tell you that, oh, you made a mistake, now this is how you read it, this is not how you read it. um, but a teacher can actually guide students to learn how to correct their own mistakes, how to identify they made a mistake while reading, and this is how I can just go back, reread it, take help from what I'm reading, take hints from the story itself to correct my mistakes. So if you don't have a teacher telling you these little tricks and teaching you how to engage with the booklet itself won't do anything.
So I believe that you have some pictures to show us about the
Yeah,
Reading Fluency program in TCLP. So can you show that and talk us through what we're seeing?
sure. Okay, so can you see the picture now?
Yes.
Okay, so here we see a reading fluency class where Bhavna ma'am, our reading fluency teacher, is starting a read aloud. So that's like how typically we usually start all our library programs, and definitely how we start a reading fluency program too. So through a read aloud, the teacher is essentially modeling how to read a book fluently, because students are seeing and observing what all the teachers doing with the book, and the teachers also introducing to a new story every day, and everybody's collectively participating in the act of reading and listening to a story, but also making meaning out of it. But also what you will see in the background is these boxes of books and this rack of books. So these books are available in the classroom all the time, and students can just get up anytime and browse through it. What is also important to see here is how the classroom is arranged. So we don't have desks and chairs. Um, we are sitting on the floor in a circle, and the students are free to move about, and that's important, because our physical activity, our how we move our hands is also, a part of learning how to read, and we don't often realize that, because this is important part of our language. um, and we often see students, actually, I'm just going to tell another story here.
Please.
We had this student in one of our classes who was hyperactive. Like, he needed to be doing something all the time. It was hard for him to concentrate in a book. He would start disturbing everyone else. He would, play pranks on everyone. And the simplest solution we identified to his problem was that he could move around the class while reading. He did that, and it worked. It worked well. It worked so well that he started enjoying books, and he started demanding that, I want to read this book now, please bring this kind of a book for me. So um, so um, the idea is that even in the classroom structure, there needs to be certain kind of flexibility.
Freedom. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly, the freedom. Here we see one of the students reading aloud to his classmates, which is so great, because then you see that, my classmate can read, so can I. So that's an important component of learning from your peers and getting motivated from your peers.
And in fact, that child you showed in the last photograph, he would come out of Reading Fluency, and we would be sitting in the reading room, and he would come up to me, or like, it's happened on several occasions, and he would say, "Ma'am, मैं आपको पढ़ के सुनाऊंगा." And he was so excited. You would think कि class से निकले बच्चे थके हुए. He would come out like really excited, say, "Ma'am, मैं आपको पढ़ के सुनाऊंगा आप कहानी." So yeah, cool.
I'll just show. So here we see some independent reading time happening. Everyone reading a book of their choice. Some of them are reading big books, multi-chapter books. Some of them are reading picture books. Um, and Here, this is from our graduation. I don't think the picture is very clear, unfortunately, but this is graduation day, which is when we finish our reading fluency program. It's an important day because this is the day when parents come in. We have a whole celebration around the
Mm.
wonderful work, a lot of hard work that all students put in during the 6 weeks. And we share the progress that the students made with the parents, because it's important that they also know what's happening in these reading fluency programs. And students get the certificate, they get to tell about their favorite books. So it's a wonderful celebration.
What is the kind of conversations that you do have with the parents even before you start this program?
So with parents, we have multiple interactions happening right from the time of enrollment till after they have graduated. So it's so important to tell them about the program itself, what the program is about, what the students are going to do, because they need to be they need to know that their children are in a safe place. B, they need to know that it's an important thing. It's not just important for their schoolwork, but reading stories can be so important, like throughout your life. It can give you certain skills which are useful in whatever you do. Um, and so apart from telling about the program itself, we also tell the parents about the structure of the program, when the classes are happening. Because that also helps the students get adapted to the routine, because if the parents know, they can help students adapt to the routine faster. So parent involvement is so important in so many different levels. Even during the program, we regularly interact with the parents. We call them on phone, or if possible, we meet them in person to give them a progress report, tell them what's happening in the classroom. And at the end of the program, we explain how we assessed, what do these scores mean,
Mm.
uh, and what they need to do to continue, practicing. Like, this
Process.
intervention has ended, they have gained certain skills, but the practice cannot end here. They need to continue to come to the library to practice reading every day to ensure that they don't lose what they gain in these 6 weeks. So that's very important.
We are getting some questions, but I will request people to just hang on for a little bit more. We have like a really critical question coming up next for Prachi, and then after that we'll take audience questions. For those who missed the first half of this chat, please don't worry. I see Padma has some concerns. Please don't worry, because we will be putting this up on YouTube and on Facebook, the whole chat again, so you haven't missed anything. Okay, so now coming to the question of the hour, which is the pandemic, and for a program that requires the reading community group to sit together, the one-on-one attention, the peer-to-peer interaction. Um, what is happening with TCLP's Reading Fluency Program 2020?
Um, so this was a big setback for everybody, obviously, but also a big setback for our fluency program. This year we were ready to start a second year of reading fluency, and we were also ready to pilot our English reading fluency program for the first time. We were very excited, but then obviously this couldn't happen. But for the last few months, we have been, I think, since May, we have been planning, brainstorming to adapt our reading fluency curriculum into an online curriculum. Um, we are in the process of starting classes, actually. Um, so it needed a lot of creative working, a lot of brainstorming. And yes, we will start classes. We have already started some training sessions with students on Zoom. So that's brilliant. But it also it's a little bittersweet, because we know that while there are certain students who have so quickly learned Zoom and they are ready to start classes, but we know that there are so many students out there we are not able to enroll to the program.
Right.
That's a constant worry, because we know a lot of students who dropped out because they didn't have devices at home. Like, just today, one of the students informed us that they cannot participate this time because the father just got a new job and he will be out of the house all day, and that's the only smartphone they have that the father uses. So the phone will not be available at home all day long. And this was so sad because it was hard for us to tell the student that sorry, you cannot participate this time. So while we are planning this program, there is this bittersweet thing attached to it. Like, we know that not all students can participate. But saying that, we know that we cannot not start the program at all. So as I said, that we have started Zoom training sessions already. But we also understand that this program cannot be a purely online program. So first of all, student needs book to practice with. And while there are several online resources available, reading on a phone screen, when you're learning to read, when you are a grade 3 student still struggling to identify your letters, that's not the best way to learn to read. You need to hold a book in your hand to see the pictures, to flip through the pages and go back to the pages as many times as you want. So that's definitely very, very necessary. So that's where one of our blended mode component comes in, that we have made these packets of books that we are going to deliver to the students. And we are going to rotate them every week, obviously with a lot of precautions, with a lot of safety measures, with proper sanitary practices. But yeah, so that's something that we're going to do. We have already made these packages. Coming this week, we are going to start delivering them. But then there are a lot of other components that actually give us a lot of anxiety too, because we know we have to do assessments on the phone. That's our only option, which is unfair to the
The teacher will get on the phone with the child and then do the assessment one on one.
Yes, so we are going to use Zoom share screen to assess students, which doesn't sound nice, but that's the only option we have at the moment. Um, we will be doing these interactions on Zoom. We'll be sending video tutorials. We have been sending video tutorials actually. So that's how we started learning Zoom. We prepared a lot of tutorial videos on how to open a link, what happens when you click on a link, what happens when you get a Zoom link, what happens once you get on Zoom, um, how do you use our Dunya Sabki website. So we have been sending a lot of these tutorials. Each tutorial is followed by a telephonic conversation with the student to walk them through the tutorial. And then we met online to walk them through the entire process. Um, Even then, there are a lot of struggles because a lot of students drop out of the call because the internet gets disconnected, um, phone runs out of battery, or just because just today we had this Zoom session that we had to cancel because there was some problem with the server, we believe, because nobody could connect the audio. Uh, and we are worried that once we start classes and this thing happens again, that means we have lost one day's class.
What about the financial burden of like somebody who has to run Zoom on their phone and stuff like that?
Oh, that's I think that's one of the reasons that why a lot of students will refuse to join classes. They might not tell you that that's the reason, but they may say, "Oh, we have other classes to attend to." This year round, fortunately, we are in a position to provide data recharge to all the students. So at least that part gets covered. But again, if you do not have a device, for example, so that's still not, there's still no solution for that. But even so, there is this financial burden. There is this also this psychological burden, because a lot of the students we talked to told that they have a lot of school work also coming on phone. They have to wait for their parents to get back home in the evening when they get access to the phone and they can do their school work, but they're still so eager to do a class like this because I've seen this happening in the library and they know what it is about and they want to participate. So just sitting in front of a screen for so long is also stressing them out. Like, a lot of students have actually told us that they are feeling a lot stressed because it's not easy to work on phone, especially when you don't have an adult guiding you through the process.
Right. So, I mean, it does seem like a huge challenge, and I, for one, will definitely be eager to see how the first batch unrolls. So, shall we take a few questions that are coming in from, because it's now almost like we have about 10 minutes. So, Our wonderful Shashank has been keeping track of the Facebook stuff. Okay, so our first question comes in from Padma, who runs a library in the south in Bangalore, I believe. How do you decide children have reached a level of reading fluency and can now graduate from the program?
So, as I mentioned earlier in the program, that certain research in the West like based on a lot of these researches, there are certain benchmarks that have been set. So basically, what should be the reading speed of a student at a certain age level? Now, these researches are done with mostly native English speakers, so they are not directly applicable in our context, especially in a context where because most of these students that we work with, they start their literacy journey quite late when they enter school for the first time at the age of 6. So definitely these benchmarks are not the best benchmarks. So what we need is more research in this area. So for now, we are following these ideals that are followed in the Western reading interventions, but we are also trying to get a better understanding through our own program of how our students read and what is an appropriate reading level for them at a certain age. What will also help is interacting with them to know there are certain comprehension tests that we can do. We are not yet doing that in the fluency program. We would love to do that in uh, future when we are more settled into this new mode of reading fluency. But so but basically based on these assessments and the scores, we identify
Right.
how much that.
And I mean, each batch is of a specific time period, right? 6 weeks. And
Yeah,
at the end of the 6 weeks, if you feel, or even if the child feels that they can do this again, like a second round, does that happen?
definitely.
Yeah.
So, at the beginning of the program, based on the assessment scores, we identify if the student need additional practice time apart from the 1 hour fluency class that they get every day. So we enroll certain students who need that to the Learn to Read program, where they get an additional half an hour one-on-one interaction with the teacher or with a volunteer and an intern. So they get 1.5 hours of practice every day, and based on their post-assessment scores, if we find the need for the student to enroll for a second batch, we then enroll them again. We have had a lot of students actually last year who re-enrolled for a program,
Right.
and we saw remarkable improvements in their reading speeds and reading confidence.
The next question comes from Akhila. Akhila asks, do you match texts to groups or ability, even at a broad level, uh, during the fluency program?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Do you match the text
Mm.
to the groups? I think she perhaps means, like, different age groups and different
Okay.
and sorry, I'll just ask the second part of a question, then you can answer it all together. And are some of these children at the earliest level of learning to read as well? Like, is there an urge, like a very, very like bare bones reader, even them you are working with?
Yes. I'll first answer the first part of the question.
Yeah, how do you match that?
So every day when students read, we also track the number of books they are reading, and which books they are reading. So, for
Right.
example, on an average last year, like all the 300 students collectively read more than 23,000 books. That's remarkable. Um, but anyways, when we track these books every day, we have broadly categorized into three categories. So we have picture books, we have the easy reads, and we have the long reads. Long reads are mostly multi-chapter books, either a short story collection or a novel, or a non-fiction book but with multiple chapters. Easy reads will be usually a short stories, a little more complicated stories with less of pictures and more of text. And then there are the picture books. We don't we don't tell students at which kind of book they should be reading. We obviously encourage based on how far along they are in their reading practice and which grade they are starting. And we do encourage them to try out a little more complicated text, and if they're prepared for it. But we don't tell that, oh, you are in grade 8, you can't read picture books anymore.
Mm.
So it's based on so we guide them, but we let them select the pace of how they move along the kind of reading material they're reading.
Okay.
And the second part of the question?
The second part was that are some of these children at the earliest level of learning to read as well?
Yes, there are. So that's why we have that learning to read program. So we also have like in the last batch of 2019-2020, we had a student studying who should have been studying in class 11 or 12, I think, had dropped out of school, had moved to Delhi recently from another state. So they were really struggling with Hindi. They knew how to read, uh, at like could identify the letters but couldn't read well. But we worked with them, enrolled them in the learning to read in the learn to read program, and then she did brilliantly. At the end of the 6-week intervention, she had moved on from picture books to easy reads, which we think is a huge jump.
Okay, Padma has some questions which have already been addressed in the first half. So, Padma, the short answer to diagnostic test is yes. And the screening Prachi has described, she's also gone into fair amount of detail about the sessions that you have asked about within the 6 weeks. Okay, but she now Padma asks, can you share the assessment patterns with us, and would they be similar to the ASER test, ASER tests?
They're not exactly similar to the ASER test because um, that test is a lot more detailed. Like there are a lot of different components, but even the reading fluency component is slightly different, like how we do it. So essentially, so there's a pretty standardized way of assessing fluency, but then there are variations to it. So what we do is Eklavya is very nicely told us that we could use their textbook, the Khushi Khushi series, which is an open source textbook, and we could use stories from their textbook because that's graded. So that really helped us. So we use multiple stories from each grade level, read 3 stories with each student for 1 minute, and we track how many words they're able to read in 1 minute for each text and how many errors they're making. That's not the only way of doing assessment. There are various ways. You could read just one text for, let's say, 5 minutes and take the average of those 5 minutes. So there are various ways of doing this. Doing it, we chose this method because because like, should I go into the reasons? Like, do we have that kind of?
I mean, yeah, we can take a little.
Okay. So the reason we chose to use 3 different texts was because it gives students a fair chance, because there's a good likelihood that they couldn't read through the first text because um, the names in the text, like, and the names in the story were too complicated for the child, so they have a second chance to read a different text. Also because in the first text you're a little nervous. When you read the first text, you take a short break and then you read the next text. It gives you a chance to just gather your thoughts and read better. So that's the reason we chose to use 3 different texts, and yeah, that's worked well for us.
Okay, we have almost reached the end of our time, but I'm going to cheat and go a little over because I want to ask you, just to wrap up our conversation. I think we've done the program now for 3 years running.
So we started in 2016. We did 3 years of pilot program.
Right.
Then in the 4th year, we did a year-long program. So this is essentially the 5th year.
So if I were to ask you in terms of your insights over all of these years of running this program, what have you learned about our community of our library members, because I'm asking this, in a fairly like political way, because there are many assumptions made about first generation, schoolgoers and first generation learners and first generation readers about what they are capable of or not, especially in comparison with kids, who come from more privilege and are therefore guaranteed better, reading milestones, achievement of better reading milestones. I just want to get to the root, because we really try to attack those assumptions a lot in our library work, but the reading fluency gives us data to have certain insights. So yeah, like talk to us a little bit about myth busting.
So So I think you already mentioned that a lot of our members are first generation school goers. In this 1 year of reading fluency intervention, on an average, we had seen students' reading speed going up from 58 correct words per minute to 78 correct words per minute. That's like almost a 35% jump. That's
More
great.
than
That's
me.
a 6 week of it. So that basically means that if earlier they were able to read 58 words in 1 minute, they can now read 78 words in 1 minute. So essentially, the amount of time they took to read 3 pages, in that amount of time, they can probably read 5 pages now. That's a big jump. Uh, so, um, and so what we really learned was that this program is implementable, it's easy to implement, and it's easy to implement in any school, in any library. B, that anybody can learn to read. All they need is a good environment to learn to read. It's a good environment. It's an open space where they can come and practice reading. One of my so during my one of my presentations, someone asked me that students these days they don't want to read. कोई नहीं पढ़ना चाहता, किसी को पसंद ही नहीं है. And we have seen this at our library and in the Reading Fluency program that that's not true. Students love to read. If they are not reading, if they don't see themselves as readers, a good chance is that they are either scared or they don't know how to read yet. And we have seen that just a short amount of time, just 6 weeks, is good enough to at least get them started on how to read. Like they won't become proficient readers in 6 weeks. That's not what we are claiming. That's not what we promise the parents. But what can happen in these 6 weeks is for the student to realize that it's that they can read, that they can come to the library and they can continue to practice reading. So I think that was the biggest takeaway for us, that there is just not the one way of teaching language that's happening in our school. B, libraries are so essential, and free libraries are essential because unless and until you can actually walk into the library with freedom, you can't learn to read. C, reading fluency programs are so easy to implement. We can implement it in all classrooms across the country. And four, these programs work with all students. Like we have worked with students of all ages, of all genders. We have worked with students who had reading disabilities, and they did well. Like they didn't become proficient readers at the end of 6 weeks, but
They reach the next level.
they reached the next level, and they became regular members at the library. So yes, we have worked with many different kinds of students who for whom Hindi is the first language, for whom Hindi is not the first language, and it works with all students.
All right. That was amazing. I learned a lot. Even though you and I both work at the same library, I think I learned a lot today. Um, I think reading fluency, if we can all of us who work in free libraries, if we can think of it not just as this very stodgy sort of classroom intimidating program, but really as something that frees your members and like frees them as readers, frees them as thinkers, gives them confidence, so that even if once they graduate and they step out beyond the library, that powerful all the powerful things they have gained in the reading fluency program will carry them through life, and so don't let anyone, if you are running a free library, please don't let anyone make you think that it is not doable. um, the kids need a system to scaffold them, and if you can give that scaffolding through the reading fluency program, I think massive transformations can happen. And if anybody from our government ever sees this, I would say the same thing. If anybody from the publishing side sees this, I would say support reading fluency programs. If there are other kinds of supporters who want to help us but are hesitant, every time you donate, it fuels programs like the reading fluency program, because we have like the best teachers and trainers and reading fluency specialists that we could only have because you supported us. So on that note, thank you very much. for joining us. Thank you so much, Prachi. This was such a last minute ask of you, and you really this was a mind blowing conversation for me. I will be putting up this video on YouTube. It will of course be on Facebook very soon, like in the next hour or so. So you can go back and rewatch it. And if you have any questions regarding this, you can put it in the comment section. You can message us on Facebook. You can drop a comment on YouTube, and we'll try to answer them even after this session is over. All right. So thank you so much. I think I will say bye to you, and we can end this chat now.